We have Jan Miller from the Student Loan Consultant. We had him on the podcast in the past. If you guys want to check that out, Google his name in our archives. But this podcast is going to be pretty short and it's going to be more specifically targeted on how to get approved for a home loan mortgage despite having a large student loan debt. Just a little icebreaker. I don't have any student loans anymore because I guess I was a bonehead and I paid mine off. So I heard, this is like months ago, that the government's paying people's student loans off. What the
Well,
heck?
yeah. So in a number of different ways, but the one that gets the media attention right now would be the $10,000 or $20,000 Biden-Harris loan forgiveness, which is a unilateral forgiveness that a majority of borrowers qualify for. And the way it works is if your incomes are under certain thresholds, basically 125,000 per year individually or jointly, 250,000 if you're married. And if you also had Pell Grants, you'll get $20,000 forgiven, or if you have less than 20,000 up to that amount. If you don't have Pell Grants, then you'll get 10,000 if you meet those thresholds. Now, and they're back when they first announced this, there was on the studentaid.gov, you could go in and actually apply for it. It was very simple. You didn't even have to log in. 7 questions, basically name, address, social, and so forth. And it would automatically qualify you for the 10,000 in forgiveness. But they put it on pause when, of course, were legal challenges. And now it's gone all the way to the Supreme Court, and we're waiting for the Supreme Court to decide, which is supposed to happen in June, at which point, if they uphold it, then everybody gets their 10 or 20,000, depending on what they qualify for. And that money will just be deducted from your balance. And that would be it. And that kind of has dictated a little bit when the pandemic forbearance ends too, which is, of course, the forbearance that prevents payments from being required or from any interest that accrues throughout the pandemic. And they keep pushing that back. There's been like 8 extensions on it. And the latest extension is really due to give the borrowers a chance to receive the forgiveness first before they actually have to start making payments. So once the Supreme Court decides and whether or not we actually are going to receive that forgiveness, then payments will likely resume after that.
But this is only 10, 12 grand? I thought it was like a lot.
10 to 20,000. Now that's for the Biden-Harris forgiveness. Now there's also been what's called the PSLF, or Public Service Loan Forgiveness Waiver, and the IDR waiver, which is the income-driven repayment waiver, and the one-time adjustment. And what those do is allow borrowers who didn't qualify for the program or weren't properly enrolled in the program in the past to count older payments towards the qualifying total. So if you'd worked for 10 years in a nonprofit and because of some technical nuance, you didn't qualify, which happened to a lot of people. So it's a complicated program. Those people are now allowed, as long as they work full-time for a nonprofit or government agency, they were allowed to count that time period. And what it did is result in a number of people getting immediate forgiveness. And in the neighborhood, I've had clients as much as $700,000 in student loan debt forgiven under the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Waiver.
Okay. So that's the one, like work in like an underserved area for 10 years or essentially be a teacher.
Yeah, or any nonprofit.
Yeah.
50% of my clients are physicians. And if they work directly for the hospital or university, then they qualify for the program.
And they get all their undergrad, graduate, and med school.
Everything that's left after they meet the 10-year criteria.
Okay.
So they'll have to make 10 years of qualified payments, and then that overlap at the time frame that they work for a nonprofit full time, and then they can get the loan forgiven. But a lot of people have put in the 10 years already, but for various reasons, they got knocked out technically from qualifying. For example, they were in the wrong program, or they were in a forbearance. For example, just to use residents as an example, for attending physicians, a lot of them have the opportunity to go into what's called the fellowship or residency forbearance, which didn't qualify before. They didn't realize they could go into an income-driven plan based on their residency income that would create a low payment as well, just a few $100s a month. So those people, they're counting that time frame even though they didn't make payments in this new waiver that came out. So a lot of people qualified under that.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a big subject all in itself.
Yeah, I think most of our investors, I mean, I guess every dollar counts, right? But 10, 20 grand is not too much. That's like a fraction of some of these guys 1 year. But we have a lot of doctors and people with degrees, grad school, doctor degrees. So maybe that second one is a bigger thing for them to
Yeah,
get with you on.
for
Can
sure.
I
The
ask
10
you,
doesn't, affect most of my clients.
so along those lines, like I get hit with this podcast, all kinds of random people hit me up for these financial tools or these crazy like legal entity schemes, and it's always done by like a not a lawyer or a, but they call them like legal promoters is what they call them. But anyway, like these guys will hit me up, and one of these ones were like, there's this scheme where like to get that 10-year thing you're mentioning, work for a
Yeah,
nonprofit, they would create a nonprofit legal entity, even though they were working for their for-profit job, but they were using the shell company to, and they're setting these up for these clients and claiming it was working. And as soon as I heard that, I just ignored them. But have you heard of that thing?
sure. There are circumstances where you can, instead of working for a nonprofit, you can own your own nonprofit and qualify. You still have to put 10 years in, and you also have to prove that's your major source of income. And so there are ways of doing that. Creating a shell account, or what, some of that sounds a little shady. I'm not sure exactly what they're doing there, but there are ways to qualify for that 10-year forgiveness if your company and you own a nonprofit. But there are requirements that must be met in order to do that.
Yeah, clever, but I was maybe work with the professionals and definitely get a comfort letter from the lawyer doing it.
Right, for sure. Yeah, I would definitely do your due diligence before you commit to something like that.
Yeah, I'm not advocating for that. And that's why you get what you pay for on the podcast scene. It's free. Diverge on the topic. The topic that we want to specifically go down today is you're having a lot of your clients apply for home loans, right? And then the mortgage lenders, what the heck is this big student loan debt?
Sure. With a mortgage lender, traditionally, with any type of loan, in addition to credit score, what's important to them is your net income to debt ratio or student loan debt ratio or any debt for any type of loan. And a typical loan, whether it be a home loan or a car loan or a personal loan, your payment is determined based on amortization math, right? A loan math is typical. You have X amount of dollars you owe at such and such an interest rate over a certain amount of time, and that creates a payment that pays the loan off during that time. And you can use that as a qualified monthly expense. For example, if you have $100,000 at 6.8%, you're looking at a payment of probably $1,100 approximately per month on a 10-year loan term, which is what most student loans default to before you do anything to them. For borrowers who owe a lot more than they make yearly, this can make it more difficult for them to get a home loan. You may have an 800 on your credit score, but you may owe $300,000 in student loans and only make $100,000 a year. And the mortgage lender is going to look at this and go, how are you going to afford, if you have a $300,000 loan, we don't understand how you're going to afford our mortgage payment. And because your payment, they'll assume, is probably around $3,000 a month. Nowadays, mortgage lenders, more and more of them, not all of them, but a good portion, an increasing portion of them, are taking into account what the borrower's payment is based off of the income driven program they qualify for. So let's say you have that same situation where someone makes $300,000 a year and they owe $300,000 in federal student loan debt and they make $100,000 a year. Instead of having a $3,000 payment to pay that loan off in 10 years, their payment may only be $700 a month based on their income. And that program itself that creates that payment is based on their debt to income ratio, basically. So if their income goes down, so does their payment. Their income goes up, so does their payment proportionally. Now that mortgage lenders are getting onto this, they're starting to accept that qualified payment in the income driven programs as the monthly expense for their student loan. So in other words, what it allows borrowers to do is to get approved for the home loan, even if they owe 3 or 4 or 5 times what they actually make yearly, because their monthly payment is a reflection of their income, not a reflection of the size of the loan. So they can get approved despite having a huge amount of student loan debt.
It's great to hear that lenders and bankers, more importantly, underwriters, are using real world or things that make sense. Similarly, what we see on our side is like investors will get K1s from in real estate investments, and real estate investments, one of the reasons we do them is we get huge amounts of first year losses, which comes from the depreciation or passive losses, or which is the paper losses. But for a lot of the problem is for a lot of the bankers, especially when you're buying your basic home mortgage, they don't have the financial education to understand that these K1s isn't showing that somebody invested in a bad deal that lost a whole bunch of money in the first year. It's just the paper loss and haven't figured that one out yet. So they're definitely ahead in your arena for that, but
Yeah.
nobody made a YouTube video for the mortgage underwriters and the mortgage brokers to understand this one. So we're still in the dark ages here. But
Right.
those were short. The bankers are smart, but unfortunately, they are like bean counters. And there's a difference between having a smart kid and a financially educated.
And they're a little bit, they can be rigid and old school a little bit. We're based on traditional, when it comes to student loans, based on traditional loan math. When student loans don't work anything like a traditional loan, or the opposite of them, especially when we're talking about the forgiveness programs and the income driven programs. Where a traditional loan, your cost of that loan, basically your principal plus interest over time, right? That's the three variables of loan math. Whereas a student loan, your total cost of that loan and your monthly payment aren't based on that at all. They're based on cumulative payments plus potential taxes owed on the forgiveness. So it's a completely different equation. And the more 5-10 years ago, it was almost impossible to get a home loan if you were upside down on student loan debt. But now, as they become more and more aware of how they work and how these programs work and how student loans work, they're starting to actually, the underwriters are starting to allow these things to go through.
Going through working with the lender, is any like tips or best practices to walk them through this? Or
Yeah, number one, you need to interview the mortgage lender. You need to find out if they accept the income driven repayment programs of student loans when determining the monthly debt to income ratio and factoring in their student loan debt. And if they don't know what you're talking about when you ask them that, that's your answer. No.
yeah.
But
So a
if
lot
they
of
do,
like
yeah,
dentists or doctors say, oh, we should go to this guy because they have like special doctor loans.
sure, that's
There's nothing, none of the such. It's just these mortgage brokers just are able to use the income driven repayment program underwriting guidelines. It's not like it's different.
yeah, those are targeted for doctors. Your doctors receive special privileges for a regular refinance a lot of times too, because they historically doctors have, there's a better chance a doctor is going to pay back a student loan than a teacher. So these are things that an actuarialist knows. So companies will corner those markets, those sectors, and say, okay, if we just deal with this type of client or this career, we can promote that person as that, and there's a better chance they'll get approved. But also, yes, for physicians, especially in residency and whatnot, where they're only making 60 grand as a resident or 70 or 80 as a fellow, and they owe $500,000 in student loan debt, you can demonstrate what the payment's going to be based on their income versus what the balance of the loan is. They can use the same tools, but the doctor loans also is its own product really as well.
Yeah. And maybe you're not the guy to ask this, but my understanding is Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac backed loans by the government are like the best loans one can. Is those doctor loans still a type of those Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac loans? Just a
I don't
certain,
believe so. Yeah, no, I believe their own private product. I don't think they're a part of that, but that is going to be outside of my area of expertise.
yeah.
But I know that they have certain advantages for doctors, but they're going to be more familiar with the income driven plans more likely because it's very common for physicians to work for nonprofit or government agencies. So often for the university or for the hospital, which are typically nonprofits. So they're in the programs quite a bit, can benefit them. Now, I give the example, ER doctors, for example, or they typically work for contracting groups and not directly the hospital. So they don't usually qualify for public service loan forgiveness. And so the income driven programs don't make as much sense for them. They usually make as much as they owe and so forth. Whereas a radiologist, for example, that has 5 years of residency and 2 years of fellowship, and then they usually do work for nonprofits, their situation is totally different. They may owe twice what they make, especially at first, and they qualify for all these programs so they can use them to demonstrate to the underwriter what their monthly payment is based on their income and not off of the amount of debt. So it lowers their payment, frees up cash flow, allows them to get approved for loans they otherwise wouldn't.
But for generally for like outside of just that one industry, for pretty much all people with student loans, you go to a lot of these personal finance blogs, and then the right side of the page is cluttered with these like ads to refinance your student debt at a lower rate you consolidate them. Like, what's the catch there?
Oh,
is
yeah.
it like recourse,
Yeah.
non-recourse, or there has to be some catch to
Yeah. It's a private student loan refinance. The one catch is that you forfeit all federal programs forever if you refinance the loan. So let's say SoFi or Common Bond or Credible, Splash, all these different
yeah.
companies. And what they
Use
do is,
my $100 affiliate. Just kidding, folks. That's just
yeah,
what
exactly.
everybody
They may
does
even
out
give you,
there.
yeah, they may even give you $500 or $1,000 just for getting approved. And those type of loans are great for people who have good debt to income, right? So they make more than they owe. That's my ER docs have been a great example of that. They're not going to qualify for PSLF. Income driven plans don't really make a whole lot of sense long term, and they can afford the large $3,000, $5,000 payment or whatever it is. So they just refinance it, get a better rate, and save money in the long run. But if you, let's say you're pediatrics or general and you owe several times, 3 or 4 times what you actually make, even as attending, then the programs are outstanding because your payment is based off of your income and not off the balance, and it lowers your payment. But if you refinance that, first of all, now you've got a traditional payment. So let's say you have $500,000 in loans. Let's say they give you a 3% rate. There's the best rate you could possibly get right now due to inflation. You're still looking at a payment on a 15-year term of $4,000 a month, right? So they might not be able to afford that, even though they're attending physicians, because they've got other bills and they're only making $200K as an attending, as a peds or as general. So for those people, refinance is not a good idea. For borrowers who don't work for nonprofit, who make more than they owe, refinance can be a good idea. But once you do it, you can never go back, and you forfeit all the federal safety net and benefits. With federal loans, cancel upon death. There's a death benefit, heaven forbid. There's always, if something goes wrong, you're always protected.
That's a huge one. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I don't know, people like to get lucky with the government bailing people out or giving another freebie. You lose out on that. But
Completely, yeah. So what if, here's a great example. Let's say you put 10 years in the nonprofit, you weren't in the correct program or whatnot, so you only have 5 years of qualified payments in PSLF. Then you refinance the loan, and then this new PSLF waiver that Biden came out with comes out. You don't qualify anymore because you refinance. Your loans aren't federal loans anymore. You're out of luck. If you kept the loans in the federal system and you didn't refinance, then you could potentially qualify for it. So the refinance immediately eliminates all forgiveness potential.
yeah, you got not just rate and term, and maybe I'll use like a similarity with our investing. Like we get a lot of non-recourse debt, and let's say it's at 6%. If I were to get a recourse loan where my whole personal financial being is on the line personally, I'm not gonna go after. I'm not gonna do it for 5%, maybe even not even for 4%. It's not all just rate and term, and that's what we're talking about here. But I guess for some situations where the person is debt adverse, they just want to pay off the debt, even though that may not be the best thing, especially for a sophisticated investor, but just what the layperson does. And they're going to extinguish that loan very aggressively in 2 to 3 years. They have the cash flow to do it. It might make sense.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
It's an individual assessment. That's why I always tell people is that whenever you hear one size fits all solutions for student loan repayment, it's wrong. It's going to be wrong. You need to do a full assessment, not only of that person's student loans and what they qualify for, but what their individual financial objectives are and how much money they're willing to pay, what their income growth is. All these things need to be forecast and taken into account to determine whether it even makes sense to pursue those programs or whether they should refinance if they're giving up anything and what makes sense for them for whatever their particular goals are. And that varies. It's an individual snowflake. Everybody has a very unique individual situation, and it gets very complicated very fast, especially the bigger your debt gets.
Yeah, it's not just rate and term. And I think that on my first glance at it, I was like, what's the catch? And thanks for pointing it out for us. In another one of your articles, you mentioned this infamously shady student loan servicer customer service. What's that all about?
Now, there's two different things. There's debt relief agencies, which are companies that like slam people into income-driven plans without just promising a lower payment, regardless of whether it's the right thing to do for them. Just because you qualify for it doesn't mean you should be in it. Then those are free programs with a little bit of effort you can figure out yourself. And then you have the student loan servicers. They're just poorly trained. I often say that your customer service rep at Nelnet or Mohila or Great Lakes or any of these loan servicers, probably it'd be better to talk to them about TikTok and Instagram than it would be about your student loans, even though that's what they're supposed to be answering. They're just call center reps. They have a high turnover. It's a very sophisticated topic. In fact, the loan servicer has on their website, it'll say, you should never have to pay for student loan advice. You can find it here. And of course, everybody who hires me has already exhausted their attempts at getting the information through their loan servicer or through their own ombudsman, even at the US Department of Education, and come up short. And then they come to me because the resources are not available for borrowers for student loans are not very good right now, which is one of the reasons I have a business.
Yeah, and that's why I kind of brought you on. Got a pretty good business. He's got a long clientele list. He offers just a quick pay by the minute type of consultation service. And overall, I'm recovering cheapo personally. If you guys go to my cheapo page, simplepassivecashflow.com/cheapo, you see all the crazy stuff I would do to just waste my time. But every time I look back and I've been changing my ways, every time I try to do something the cheap, easy, free way to save a buck, I got burned. And especially
Yeah.
when you're dealing with this type of stuff, it's just don't be cheap. And plus, cheaper people tend to be not as fun and
Right.
they not hang out
While
at
you
our
can,
events too
yeah,
either.
right. You can tell when you call or talk to these people that where it doesn't sound quite right, or they don't quite sound knowledgeable, or they don't answer questions directly. These are things that become obvious with a little investigation.
Or I think what our investors will do, or like some of the podcast listeners will do, is they'll scour the internet, waste entire evening, listen to a whole bunch of like uncurated podcasts about certain things, but it's never certain times it goes past a threshold where it's more personal finance and personal based on your personal situation, and you'll never get it. And I look back and like I don't have very many regrets in life being relatively young, but I do look back in my 20s and there were a lot of evenings where I spent Googling a topic because it was too cheap to pay somebody
Yeah,
for.
yeah, that's true. You know what I've noticed too, and this is kind of, I think, in people in business notice this over the years, that I've been doing this for 25 years now, and the borrowers that are willing to pay my hourly are the ones that are ready to really do what's necessary to tackle their situation. And whenever, if you give out free information or whatnot, often those people are looking for handouts and not really willing to do the work. And I remember I used to give deals to people in special circumstances. They wouldn't follow through with what I told them they needed to do or needed to help them do. And because they just weren't committed to the process.
Yeah, I heard something absurd the other day. Like somebody said, "Oh, I have a CPA that does this certain type of return or this audit for free for me." How do they make money? Why are they doing that? It's probably
Right.
because they need to build the reputation of their business because they don't have a reputation at this
Right.
point, and you're the kind of the sucker who's going to help them build it,
They
stake
need
and all.
content. They need, yeah, examples. Yeah, I had a friend of mine actually contact me, and he called me out of the blue. Like, I hadn't talked to him in a long time. He didn't really actually want to talk to me. What he wanted to do was tell me about what his startup was all about, and then wanted me to give him a review afterwards, just so that, and I'm like, I can't give you a review for that. I don't even
Yeah,
know what you're about.
yeah,
And you're going to want to put not just me, but my business as a reference there. And sorry, buddy, I can't do that. But you get a lot of people searching for content and for reviews and whatnot. And
yeah. This is the worst one. I call it the Trojan Horse podcast. There are so many garbage podcasts out there these days, especially the ones that are geared towards budding entrepreneurs. Those are a dime a dozen. But these guys will create a podcast and then invite other entrepreneurs on to tell their story. But really, all it is to build rapport with them for 15 to 20 minutes, make them feel like warm and fuzz inside. And then after the call, they pitch them on the services of the guests.
yeah,
They pitch
yeah,
the guests. I'm like, man, this is where we've come to as a society. So
yeah.
yeah.
I've had that
But
happen.
but anyway, you find some gold here, and kind of that's why we bring on Jan back. But if you guys want to book a call with him, student-loan-consultant.com. Any last common question you hear come up from folks in the last year or two since we've had you, just to wrap things up? Or
Yeah, they do change over time because there are lately on the mortgage one is one of them. It's one of the reasons I wrote the blog because I've been getting a lot more borrowers running into trouble because the bank won't accept a zero payment. They're in the pandemic forbearance for no payments due. 90% of the federal loans are in that. And I literally do conference calls with them and their mortgage lenders to get them into a qualified payment. We have to cancel the forbearance, put them into a repayment plan that the mortgage lender will accept, and the lowest one that we can, so that it gives the borrower the greatest chance of getting approved. Get them approved, and then I put them back into the forbearance after they've closed. That's happened a lot lately, and that's why I wrote that. But also understanding the income-driven repayment and PSLF waivers, which are very complicated, and understanding how it applies to them, whether they qualify, and if they can get approved for that forgiveness. Obviously, that's a strong topic now. And then everything in between. Not everybody's taking advantage of those programs, and some people are wanting to know whether they should continue to pursue the program. And now that we're approaching the end of the pandemic forbearance, then payments are going to start to begin. So there's a lot more. I'll be getting very busy in the next coming months as we approach the summer here, when payments are about to begin, and people have to think about their student loans again.
Yeah. So if you were one who thought you were super smart and cool for refinancing to a third party private loan servicer, you're not getting those COVID forbearance perks, right?
Yeah, no, you're not. Yeah. And I'll read that from, I won't say the names, but very popular, well-known financial people say, you should refinance your loans now with such and such rates. It's inappropriate for them to make that suggestion as a blanket suggestion. I would say, for every 20 consultations I give, I recommend private student loan refinance about 1 out of 20 times. So
Yeah.
it's rare. If you qualify for federal student loan or for private student loan refinance, you probably don't need it. And if you need it, you probably don't qualify. In other words, if you need it as a solution for your student loan problem, that means that the bank's not going to approve you, because they're going to see that you can't afford your payment. And if you do qualify, well, good on you. That means your debt to income ratio is so strong that you can refinance at a great rate, and you're not really a person who needs a super amount of help. I'll be glad to help you, but you're not in a critical situation or a situation that needs more instructed attention. But yeah, refinancing, only do that when you're ready to commit. You know for sure that your income is going to be stable, because if it goes downhill, you don't have the same resources you do in federal loans. You want to make sure that the rate is significantly better than what you're paying now. It's only worth it if you get a much better rate, because you're giving up all the safety nets and benefits of a forgiveness potential of a federal loan, and the death benefit and everything else that covers that. You want to make sure it's a good deal before you forfeit that.
Close this out, folks. Maybe a lesson learned here is never take financial advice or loan advice from a mortgage broker. Never listen to a real estate agent broker on which home you're buying, because these guys all make money when you buy. And in some cases, I personally use a lot of third-party consultants, third-party underwriters to tell me what I need to know. Maybe also applies to never listen to your friendly neighborhood syndicator either. But anyway, that's hearsay, and have a sense of humor out there, guys. Have a great evening. We'll talk to you guys later.